Welcome to Esports Odyssey, a podcast dedicated to making esports simpler by breaking it down and learning from the best. On the show, we talk to successful people from within the esports ecosystem to see what sets them apart from the rest of us. Today on the show, we've got Excoundrel, a famous commentator, mostly famous for his work in League of Legends, I would say. Content creator, host, all sorts of other things. Widespread across multiple games, two in the past, and I think we'll go a little bit more into that in a bit. Welcome.
Hi, Phil. Nice to see you. Nice to be talking with you. I'm very happy to come on the podcast, as me and Phil go back a long way. So it was nice to sort of be able to join him on something like this.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. I'm excited. We've known each other for quite some time now, but I don't think I've ever really found out much about your story. I think it's always a little bit like this, where people don't actually really tell people their life story, right? That's kind of frowned upon anyway.
I mean, I guess it's just one of those industries where not many people ask, to be honest with you. I don't often get asked. I get often asked about how I started in esports and what I did to become self-sufficient and make it a career, but people don't really ask beyond that. I think that's kind of the baseline that people talk about.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I think it's very important to take a look at, and this is where we go in a little bit deeper into people's pasts on this podcast, into what even got people into games, what did people do in their childhoods, because so far we've seen a lot of similarities between a lot of the people that work in this industry. So let's actually start there. Let's start with your childhood. What is your earliest memory of actually playing games? What were your first games?
Well, obviously I was a 90s kid, so my very early memories of that of Nintendo 64. I remember my dad brought it when we came home from karate one day, and he was playing GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64, and that was our first console that we shared as a family. So I've got very fond memories of GoldenEye with my dad. I remember playing Mario 64, and I remember for 6 years growing up, I had 119 out of 120 stars, and I couldn't for the life of me find the last star. And eventually, when I got to the age when I was using the internet and browsing the internet, I found out that you could get a star on the Peach slide, and the very first foyer when you go into the castle, there's a little Peach portrait that you can jump through, and it goes to like a slide, and you have to get to the end. Well, you get an extra star for completing it in a certain time. I never knew that, and that was the last star that I needed to get to unlock the 120 stars on 64. But other than that, I used to watch my dad play PC games, like very early PC games. I watched him play a lot of Commandos, which is a really, really awesome, massively underrated, I guess, tactical wartime.
I love that series.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. A really good series, and often is forgotten, I think. But it was just a very, very, very good computer game. I watched him play the early Tomb Raiders. I watched him play Medal of Honor Allied Assault. And I think Medal of Honor Allied Assault was about the point where I actually started to game myself. And that was my first online game, Medal of Honor Allied Assault, where I played competitively online as a 13-year-old playing Medal of Honor Allied Assault.
I think that was actually pretty similar for me, or a lot of people our age, I would say. We all sort of started with Medal of Honor, Call of Duty, some CS, right? Some RTS. I think we were very varied back in those days.
Yeah, there was a lot on the market. I think after Medal of Honor Allied Assault, the one game that occupied the majority of my early teenage years towards mid-teenage years was Diablo 2. That game occupied 5, 6, 7 years of my life, and I kept going back to it even when I was moving on to World of Warcraft. So I think Diablo 2 was probably the defining game of my early childhood, just because of the amount of hours I put into it. I mean, I just put hours and hours into Diablo 2 LOD, really did. And I thoroughly enjoyed playing it for many years, and it kind of stoked my love of ARPG genre and RPG genre in general, because I moved on to World of Warcraft, which then probably took over the most of my life until my early 20s. So I essentially bunny hopped from Diablo into World of Warcraft, and then World of Warcraft is as it is an all-consuming game, pretty much consumed the majority of my gaming life growing up as a teenager.
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, I know obviously of your love of action RPGs. As a fellow Path of Exile player too.
We're both Path of Exile players. My problem with Path of Exile is I play like a new league religiously. I get a build that I like, and then I get bored. That's the problem. I think that I get overwhelmed. I know you're very slick at it, but I get overwhelmed with Path of Exile. There are just too many mechanics to going on and to think about that I get. I'm one of those people that doesn't like to half-ass something. So that if, I end up trying to do Delve, and I'm like, well, to get to a good level in Delve is going to take me forever. So, so I just end up stopping and just not playing, even though I find builds that I really like and really love. Because there is so much going on in Path of Exile now, I get like half-ass syndrome where I'm just like, I don't know if I can be bothered.
And you know what? I think that's one of those things that's very common for people that actually end up working in esports in general. Most of us are like that, where we don't like to half-ass things, right? So when it comes to starting to play a new game, getting into a new game, it's always all or nothing, right?
Yeah, and also for me, getting into new games is a bit more complex because, by the way, Phil, hope you don't mind. I'm actually eating a sausage every so often on the podcast. I hope that's perfectly okay. I was hungry.
Absolutely.
I often think about games for content now as well, being a content creator. So I actually find it hard to enjoy games and dedicate time to games because in the back of my mind, I'm always saying, well, you could be playing TFT and producing content. Or you could be playing this game, which could be a new up-and-coming game for content and stuff like that. So I actually find it difficult to get into and spend a lot of time in a game just for fun these days. And I actually find that it's very similar across the board, even with commentators and content creators, that it's difficult to enjoy games purely for fun because you're always thinking about what can I do with this game? Is it worth me investing my time into this game? Or should I just stick to the games that I'm already having some success in?
I guess that's a nature and one of the struggles of turning your hobby and your passion into a job, right?
Absolutely. I think everyone always says to me, "But this is the life. You play games, you talk about games for a living," and I'm like, "Yeah, but I also ruined my hobby in the process because now I no longer enjoy games at the same level that I did before. Like I wish I could go back to the days of just playing World of Warcraft until 4 a.m., playing Diablo 2 Bale runs until ridiculous times at night." But I can't. It's just not possible anymore because I'm always thinking about how I can turn my time in a game into something useful, be it time into a game to learn casting, to learn the game for a casting potential, or time to turn it into YouTube content or Twitch content or whatever. It's just very difficult to switch off from that now because the career trajectory I've had.
And that's a great segue. Actually, I want to go back to your childhood in a second, but Do you find that is actually one of the biggest struggles of the freelance life, kind of having to manage your time and the fact that you always feel like you're wasting time if you're not doing something that's productive?
Yeah, I think to an extent. I mean, I could go into great depth about why freelance esports commentary is a complete minefield for most people, but there is lots of factors, and definitely one of those. I mean, the whole reason I expanded into content creation, Phil, was because freelance esports commentary by itself was not sustaining me, and my brand was not big enough to support, competing with some of the bigger commentator brands in the world. So that's why I went into content creation, because I felt it could help improve my brand as a total. Now I've got 67,000 subscribers, which is, it's a good medium-sized YouTube channel. And that's helped me to no end in terms of my brand and allowing me to be a bit more flexible in what I do. But freelance esports commentary is hard because I started in League of Legends and I still am in League of Legends. But in order to be a successful League of Legends commentator, you really have to work with Riot. And if you want to work with Riot, you have to move to Berlin, and that's not something that my life would support. So therefore, I kind of expanded into a multi-game caster. But the problem with multi-game casting is that, yes, okay, it's great experience. I think you expand your skill set massively, but you also, unless you get very lucky, I think you will find it difficult to build a solid brand because you're constantly fleeting with several communities rather than being engaged in one. which is one of the issues that I do find myself as a freelancer having. But
I'm sure it also becomes difficult, especially with games that have the level of depth that, you know, League of Legends, Dota, CS:GO, all those games have so much depth, so much to learn, that even the most dedicated of commentators usually, you know, seem unknowledgeable about the game compared to a lot of the pro players, right? So I imagine that only adds to that difficulty, right?
Well, I used to be a color commentator in League of Legends, and for those of you that are unaware, there are two types of commentators. There is a play-by-play and a color. The color is supposed to add, in inverted commas, color to the broadcast by providing background information, analysis, that kind of stuff. So I used to be a color commentator for League of Legends, but two things happened. I wasn't going to work for Riot, so I couldn't dedicate all my time to League of Legends. So slowly, as the game evolved, I became less and less familiar with the high-level tactics. And second, it is like impossible on a knowledge basis and a brand basis to compete with ex-pro players and ex-coaches who turn their hand to commentary. Because what kind of credibility do I have as a random who can talk well about the game compared to a coach who coached one of the top teams in Europe? You know, so credibility is a massive issue when it comes to color commentary. So that's why now in League of Legends I host. So I hosted the LEC last year, and I do play-by-play, where you don't need to be knowledgeable about the game. You just need to say things nicely about team fights and sound excited. So that's why I made that move, and that's allowed me to be more flexible within League of Legends. But yeah, that's two reasons why I find it difficult as a color commentator to continue in League of Legends, because you know, and I think it's only going to get worse with people who are endemic commentators rather than ex-pro players that are just quite charismatic on camera, you know. So that's going to be some of the difficulties that I think that my particular industry will face as time goes on. When players retire and want to do something and continue to be engaged, most of them will go over to either content creation or some form of commentary or analysis, and you are, unfortunately, are just going to be usurped, and there is almost no way for you to compete with the credibility that those guys provide to a broadcast over what you may bring to a broadcast, you know.
Makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I think you know, I think that's already the transformation that you've seen a lot of games go through, right? I mean, if you look at StarCraft nowadays, obviously StarCraft isn't that active of a game anymore, but basically the entirety of the talent pool there is former players.
Yeah.
Not just the play-by-play commentators, but actually all of them.
Yeah. It's I think a lot of early esports started that way. But I do think that play-by-plays are a bit more protected than color commentators when it comes to that kind of stuff, you know.
Makes sense. I mean, it's a very different skill set, and it takes a long time to learn. And I think you're obviously excellent at it. I feel like you're commentating over this podcast right now. So
I'll wind it down a bit.
It's just that natural. It's a natural thing that I guess a play-by-play commentator has to their tonation, their way of speaking in general, right?
It's something that I had to learn pretty. I mean, this is not something that came to me naturally. I went back about a year ago. I looked at some casts of me when I was in university, when I had just started, and like the monotony of my voice back then was just absolutely like incredulous. It was just insane. It was just so boring to listen to, and I thought, wow, I've actually come on a long way. Not only in just the way I speak in everyday life, but like just my commentary skill and my ability to be more engaging with the way that I say my words is just it's evolved to no end. And I don't even know how it happened. I think it just came with the constant exposure to good commentators, the feedback, the constant need to evolve my craft. But yeah, it's not something that came naturally to me. I was very monotonous and very boring when I was about 21. So it took about 6 years to get to a point where I sound moderately interesting when I talk.
Well, I mean, you know about. I mean, people argue about this a lot, but you know about the 10,000 hour rule, right?
Yes,
you need to put 10,000 hours into anything to get to become a master at it. And I think you know, whilst a lot of people argue about it, it's obviously a good guideline in terms of, You know, if you haven't put in that many hours, if you've only put in 500 hours into doing something, it's unlikely you're actually as good as you'll be, basically, right?
Mm-hmm. I think 10,000 is a completely arbitrary number, but I think the actual rule, or the actual story that comes with it is important. Like, it's just about the fact that you, almost to an extent, that you should always look to continue to strive to improve your craft. I think the 10,000 hours is such like almost like an arbitrary, like unattainable figure, because it's supposed to be in the situation where you should always be looking to improve your craft. No one's ever going to be completely masterful, you know, in terms of what they do. So I kind of follow it more of not in a literal sense, but more of like a way of driving the way I think about my craft, you know. Just to never stop going at it. And I think that's always important with whatever you choose to try and be successful at.
Sure, absolutely. And I think definitely, I mean, this definitely applies to video games, right? Most people that put in, you know, 100, 200 hours into a game might think that that's a lot of hours, because it sounds like a lot of hours. But when it comes to competitive players, right? If you look at Dota, there's Dota players that have 30,000 hours in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always more you can play, more you can learn.
I think I've got 4,000 hours in Path of Exile, and I thought that was a lot. So 30,000 hours in a Dota is just that boggles my mind. It actually boggles my mind.
Yeah. You know, I guess some of the earliest League of Legends players might be reaching that figure at this point too. Luckily, that client doesn't show you how many hours you've played.
I think I had I think when I played WoW, I think I had like a full year of playtime on WoW when I checked on one of my accounts after like the 7 years that I'd spent on it. So I'd spent literally 1/7 of my time over 7 years logged into World of Warcraft in one way or another. Which, wow. Yeah, it's just like straight up makes me kind of sad, but also, you know, like it's just crazy how much time you can spend doing something if you really, really enjoy doing it.
So that was earlier in your life, and this is where we want to go back to, actually. Before you got into gaming, or maybe during the same time that you got into gaming, throughout kind of your youth, did you have any other major hobbies? Was there anything else that you were doing besides video games?
Yeah, I played rugby to a semi-professional level. I played for the Eastern Counties, which is basically one of the regions in the UK. So I played rugby for a very long time. I then had a knee injury, so stopped it in university, but I really loved rugby. I played guitar, bass guitar and saxophone. I was grade 8 saxophone. Really, really enjoyed that. Don't play it as much now again. It's just one of those hobbies that I just lost over time. But yeah, I had quite a lot going on outside of gaming. I think something that I've always been, although I definitely didn't practice this as a kid, I always tell people that the gaming should be enjoyed like any other hobby, and enjoyed responsibly, and part of a balanced lifestyle, and part of that is exercise. I definitely did not do this as a child, so I'm not exactly, you know, when I was a teenager, I was spending 8 hours a day when I came back from home playing World of Warcraft, so I can't really say that I followed it when I was a kid. But as I've got older and matured, I've realized that it's not something that you can solely do 100% of the time, because it isn't the most healthy hobby in the world. And I think for the sake of getting gaming to be appealing and less targeted by mainstream media, we should be promoting it as a way to, you know, trying to enjoy it as part of some sort of balanced life. And that, you know, I did have other hobbies as a kid, so it wasn't like gaming was all encompassing for me.
I agree. And I think if you look at any professional player in most games, you won't see them play on average more than 8 hours of their game a day either, right? And that's their job. So most of the time they'll have a very, very balanced life outside of the game. We'd like to thank our partners at Elgato, without whom this podcast wouldn't be possible. They provided much of the equipment used for all of our recording sessions. Elgato is the leading provider of hardware and software for content creators, leveraging decades of experience to develop widely accessible products that empower all creators to produce high-quality, professional content. Elgato has provided us with a reliable 4K 60 Pro capture card, professional keylight lighting, and a customizable stream deck, enabling us to pull off pretty much anything we can think of. Head over to elgato.com to see their full product line. you were active in sports. You were actually competitive back then, which is, this is something that I find with most people that I speak to at the moment, that are in this industry. I think a lot of people came from sports. A lot of people were already competitive. There's always a very competitive nature when it comes to people that actually move on into esports.
Yeah,
and I think you need to be competitive because there's firstly, you need to kind of be able to what's the word? You need to understand that feeling, right? Of winning something.
You need the competitive drive. You need the competitive drive, I think. Yeah.
You need to understand why it feels good to win and why players want to win to be able to appreciate the craft.
Yeah, I agree. I actually recently did a podcast where I talked to Brolan from Fnatic. I don't know. I guess you know Brolan. He's a Swedish, very young CS:GO player.
Yep.
He's Swedish. Yeah, he's Swedish. I thought he might have been Danish. No, but he came from. He was playing competitively as a teenager in a sport. I think it's a very Swedish sport. I can't remember what it was. It's like a sport that's quite specific to Sweden.
Not sure.
No, but it was something that I didn't recognize. But he was a competitive sport player, before he moved on to esports, and so I find that story is very similar from esports. Esports pros, they all have had some kind of way to appreciate that competitive drive in their life, and so they all understand what it takes to be a top tier athlete in the industry, and they all have that drive to win, which is important.
For sure. So what else was going on in your life before you became an esports professional? I guess you actually have a degree, right?
Yeah, I went to university. I studied medicine, and did an extra degree in biomedical sciences. So I came up with two degrees, and yeah, just didn't like it. I found out about the age 21. I decided that actually medicine wasn't for me. Just because I don't want to go into the whole history of why, because it's just a long story. But essentially, the TLDR is not what I thought I wanted to do when I was 16, because I applied when I was 16. So the change that I underwent as a person from 16 to 21 was enough for me to realize that medicine was not the career path that I wanted to go. And so I was basically doing part-time commentary during university, and I was just very lucky that once I left university, a company called Super Eva Megacorp, who produced a mobile game called Vainglory, wanted to use me as a commentator for their esports scene, and offered me a kind of a deal that had some longevity to it, which allowed me to go full-time when I left university.
Got it. And how did you first get started with commentary? What was kind of your first gig?
The National University Esports League. So I was doing it through the NUL, and I was commentating on varsity matches and sort of university versus university matches for free. I then worked with a company called EGL. I don't even know if they still exist, but I was working with the Europe Gaming League. I think they do a lot of console stuff, but they were also just getting their toes in League of Legends at the time. And that's where I met Medic, who was one of my longtime casting partners, previously called Sona. So we worked together for a very long time there, and we did a lot of free commentary for about 2 years. We did some commentary at some LAN events. Our first LAN event was Epic LAN, where they gave us free tickets, and we slept on the floor next to our PCs and did the commentary there. And then my first paid gig was about 2 years into doing it as a part-time hobby, was iSeries. I got 50 quid for the weekend to go, and I got a free ticket and free camping or whatever, but I got 50 quid for the weekend, and I went and turned up and commentated over League of Legends for 50 quid.
Did you have to pay for your travel to get there, though?
Yeah.
How much was that?
I think I've got a train, so I think it was like 23 quid from Sheffield. But yeah, I think I made 20 quid for the weekend. But you know, that's what you had to go through. There wasn't the money when I started. You know, that was kind of like esports was like this niche hobby rather than what it is now. So when I started, 20 quid, you were like, holy crap, I'm getting paid 20 quid to talk about my video game that I like. Great.
Actual real money, not just a mouse pad.
Exactly. I didn't get paid in my Dignitas mouse pads. So, you know, I think, it was very fun to get the opportunity to even just make some money, but it very quickly shot up from when I left university. It was crazy.
So what even got you into casting your first match? Do you remember that?
Yes, yeah. Actually, that's a funny story. I used to be a competitive League of Legends player, and I played in the non-existent UK scene, which is basically going to UK tournaments. And I met these guys online playing League of Legends. We formed a team. We were all gold and platinum at the time, which in Season 1 and Season 2 was considered moderately decent. In the UK anyway, obviously not on a European level. We went to Liverpool. We rented an apartment for the weekend in Liverpool. We turned up to this competition run by this random guy from a college who wanted to run a League of Legends competition. So he ran this competition. I think he was called Wayne. Yeah, he was called Wayne. And then I competed, and I was a jungler. I got to the semi-finals, and then we ended up coming up against this team that was made up of like good players. So we were like okay players, but we came against these guys who were good players, and they had this guy called Shaka, who was a notorious on the server at that point Shaco and Lee Sin 2-trick player, and he just absolutely battered me. He was so much better than me, and we lost in the semi-finals. And so then I went over to the casting area, and they just had this open casting desk, and they were just like, "Dude, do you want to just have a go?" And so I was like, screw it, I'll just go and talk about the game because I'm no good at playing it apparently. And so I started talking about it, and Twitch chat at the time was basically like, "Oh my god, this guy's not awful." And I was like, "Wow, that's like a compliment from Twitch chat." And so that's what I decided, or gave me my initial drive to sort of pursue that rather than playing.
Got it. Twitch chat telling you that you're not awful. I mean, exactly. That's a pretty good kickstart. So that's actually I think a lot of people kind of have stumbled into this commentary world not on purpose. I find it's very interesting to hear. During your entire career of casting, especially, going from this first match that you casted where Twitch chat told you you're not awful to then getting your first full-time paid gig, was there ever a point, or maybe even after that, was there a point where, like a breaking point where you really felt, wow, like this was it, this was a really good cast, I'm so much better now than I was before?
Honestly, not really. It's been such a gradual process. It's one of those things where, like I said, when I went back and looked last year, I was so surprised at how bad I was when I started that I couldn't really identify where I had changed, but it just happened gradually over the time. So there wasn't really like a eureka moment. It was just a lot of hard work and a lot of hours obviously resulted in a success. And I think that's really one of the main things that I always tell new commentators is that you don't just get good at this. Yes, okay, you could be naturally charismatic and you can be good on camera, and those are good things. Those are things that sometimes you just can't teach. But you don't just naturally become amazing at this craft. It is something that does take a bit of time and effort to get to where you want to be. And I reflect back on those years, and I think I have obviously just spent a lot of time. A lot of time doing this to get to a point where I feel like I can say I'm genuinely a very good commentator. Okay.
And during that time, well, I guess you're still improving today, based on that argument, right? But especially during your early days, have you ever had some kind of mentor or someone who's helped you improve?
It's really interesting because when I started, there were very few people that were, I would say, doing it to a point, or at least to a point where they felt that they could mentor someone. Because when I started, it was like super early on. It was very grassroots. When I started, there was two commentators in the UK that did League of Legends that were above me. They were called Stress and Pulse. And they both went on to Riot and then subsequently left. But no one was ever at a point where they felt like they were going around mentoring people. I think the first time that I genuinely felt that I had a mentor was doing the first European Masters 2 years ago, where Quickshot took an active role in giving feedback and crafting, and improving your craft. I think before Quickshot, there was no one that I would ever turn around and say they specifically improved my craft. I think Quickshot was the first person that I would say actively took that role. There was no one else that I think really did that. I did look up to some people, like Deficio, for instance, in League of Legends, when I was a color commentator. I looked up to Shocks as from a hosting perspective, but no one that took an active role as a mentor until Quickshot really stepped into the European Masters 2 years ago. I think a lot of what I did was self-improvement and natural progression, rather than being told what I needed to fix. And when I met Quickshot and talked to him and had that sort of active discussion about my casting, I got a lot more direction. I think the last 2 years I've improved more than I ever have done in casting, just because of that active mentoring that I got from Quickshot.
And is there a key piece of advice that he's given you that stood out to you?
I think it's really difficult to say one piece of advice that's good for casting. I don't think I've ever been given like a golden rule. There's never been a golden rule that has been bestowed upon me to say this is what you should stick to. But I think I'm so different to a lot of commentators because I do so many different games. Especially as not as a host, just as a commentator as well. I do a lot of different games. So like I've never had like a lot of advice is sometimes game specific or stuff like that, whereas I've never really had that. I think Quickshot has. I think the one thing that I think improved my craft the most, the one piece of advice that I still use to this day is that don't be afraid of silence. A lot of new commentators feel the need to talk consistently, and any dead air is considered bad. And I definitely still fall into this trap sometimes, but I have to remind myself one of the most important things is that sometimes silence is okay, and silence can actually even add or improve the overall feel of the broadcast in the right scenarios. So I think I think that's one of the key pieces of advice that I still stick to and still think about when I'm casting, on a day-to-day basis. Okay,
that makes a lot of sense. I think that's something that a lot of people should take to heart. Probably myself too. Is there, given that you've done this for a long time now, maybe you're in the position to hand out some advice, right? So besides that, is there any other pieces of advice that you would give to people that are trying to become commentators or maybe improve?
Yeah, and this is probably something that's a little bit less that you want to hear, but connections are incredibly important in our industry. I think connections are important in every industry, but none more so than esports in my field. A lot of ways that I got work and a lot of the ways that I end up giving work to people is because I know them and I know what they're like as a commentator, and I'm happy to recommend them. So it's all very well and good striking it out on your own and just being like, I'm going to make it, I'm going to be the very best. But I think the problem that you'll find is that a lot of gigs end up being, especially newer gigs or gigs that are probably less attractive to the top tier talent, they get handed down. And you often get pass-me-downs when you start out, like, oh, hey, do you want to do this gig because I just don't really have the time or the money's not worth it for me or whatever, and a lot of my friends have got into commentary because that's how I ended up started giving them gigs. I couldn't do something or couldn't be bothered to do something because I didn't really feel like it was worth it, and I gave it to them, and now some of those guys are doing better than me, in some instances, like for instance Vedius, who is a commentator at the LEC. He was doing some stuff for the National University League, and then I remember Riot coming to me for a university collegiate event, and they were like, I was hosting the desk, and I had these two guys on the desk. They were both called Will. Sorry, no, they weren't both. One was called Andy, one was called Will, right? But they couldn't remember, the guy couldn't remember which one their actual name was. So there was me, Andy, who's Vedius, and Will, who was a guy called Frozen Dawn. And we were doing this desk, and this is from the New Live about 4 or 5 years ago. And I remember they came to me and they were like, "Oh, Excoundrel, do you want to commentate this collegiate event?" And oh, that guy on the desk that was really good. Yeah, can we have him? That's literally the only direction I got. So I assumed, because I thought Andy was more knowledgeable, I assumed they meant Andy. So I just said, "Oh, Andy, like they want you to do this collegiate event." No one said anything, and we did the event, and I was like, "Oh, cool, that went fine. That was really good." Andy then obviously went on to do LEC, and he's now the prime caster in the LEC. So Vedius is obviously doing incredibly well. But then I remember about 6 months later, Draggles, who was the guy who was doing that event at the time, he now works as I think he's the PR lead or the communications lead for Riot Games in LA now. But he said to me, oh, by the way, you know when you got Vedius in to do that event? Yeah, I didn't mean Vedius, I meant Will. when he was saying, so I accidentally gave Andy this gig, which I wouldn't say it gifted him his career, but it was obviously a way for him to get into the eyes of Riot, and it was definitely something that helped kickstart his passion, I think, for commentary as well. So he ended up then going on to the LEC when, you know, in some alternate universe, if I'd actually selected the commentator that they wanted at the time, it could have been Frozen Dawn doing the LEC. You never know. So it's really interesting to think about it. But yeah, I think connections are really important, and I would thoroughly recommend that you follow and try and engage with commentators that you want to learn from, or want to talk, or want to you know, find a connection with. Ask them to review your VODs or review sections of your casting. A lot of them are very happy to do so, especially if you don't throw them a 40-minute video and say review this. You know, I think that's one of the best ways to try and get your foot in the door. Or if you're at events and commentators are there, even if they're not like huge, just go and talk to them and say, look, I really love what you do. Can you give me any tips? Could, you know, is there any way that I could get you to review what I've done, and just find your way in from that? Because as soon as they've reviewed what you've done, and if you're good, or if they've noticed improvement, they'll say, I can recommend this person now because I know what they're like. I know what their commentary's like, and that's important.
And for you personally, do you think there was a key driver to your success, and what do you think that was?
I think so Vedius actually returned the favor for me when I left university. He was leaving Vainglory to go to Riot Games to work on the EU LCS, and he said to me, do you want to go and do Vainglory, because it's a really good gig. There's a lot of transferable knowledge from League of Legends, and they'd be interested. So I was like, yeah, it's fine. And then Vainglory ended up being 2 years of my career, which I was able to go to many different countries, get lots of live event experience. That was definitely a turning point and a career-defining moment for me was being given the Vainglory stuff, because that allowed me to get so much experience, and also allowed me to develop as a leader. I ended up becoming a leader in the talent field for that game, and would do a lot of the leadership stuff required at events like storyline meetings and giving advice and feedback and selecting casting pairs, and I became a very respected Vainglory caster. So that was a really, really, really important 2 years of my life when I just left university, and it's mostly down to Andy, who I'd previously given that collegiate gig to, which maybe kickstarted his League of Legends casting career. He gave me the Vainglory contact, which was really important.
So the key takeaway then is sort of be supportive to others, and they might be supportive back, right? And foster your connections.
But also, I think also importantly is that I obviously was from League of Legends, but ended up casting Vainglory. If you want to, there are two ways of looking at casting. You can go bullheaded at the one game that you want to succeed in. Dota, League of Legends, CSGO. The bigger it is, the harder it will be to succeed, because there are already so many established commentators in those games that to be able to get you know, some kind of edge over those guys will be difficult. But also just be willing to be flexible. Be willing to be flexible and work on games that you maybe wouldn't have previously seen yourself working on, because it's a good way to get experience and grow from there.
That makes sense. So looking at you today and your skill set today, what would you say is the biggest or the key value that you bring to an event or a broadcast?
It's really tough, because I find it difficult to sum myself up. I'm a very flexible commentator. So I have hosted, I have play-by-played, and I have color casted in various games at their highest level of competition in my career. And that's been across multiple games. I'm a very versatile commentator. I feel like I've got a lot of things that I can bring, but also I'm very adaptable. As a desk host, I feel like I am fun, engaging. I kind of modeled my desk hosting a little bit off Machine. I feel like I'm a slightly posher, slightly maybe more straight cut version of Machine, but I like to bring Machine-esque elements to my desk hosting style.
I'm a big Machine fan.
I'm a big Machine fan. The guy is an absolute dude, like machine. I was about to say the guy's an absolute machine, but he's amazing.
He is a machine.
Yes, he's one of the best commentators, one of the best desk hosts in the industry, and I've learned a lot and really look up to Machine. I haven't had much interaction with him because I've never really I've kind of only worked a few gigs with him in the past, and I haven't spoken to him much in the last 3 years. But he's someone that I hugely look up to in desk hosting, and if I could be a sliver of what he is as a desk host, I would be happy with where my career has gone. So I think Machine is definitely where I try to model some of my hosting off. But other than that, I think the versatility that I offer is important, and also like I said, I'm a leader. I'm not afraid to take feedback and give feedback. I think I'm quite easy to work with in a team. I'm not controversial, so it's not like I'm not, and don't get me wrong. People like Thorin have their place in broadcasts, I think, but I'm not like a Thorin, where some people would be scared to want to work with him because of controversial reasons, right? I am a bit more, I guess, straight cut, a bit more straight laced and not as controversial. So yeah, I think that's also important. When you have to be as versatile as I do and work with so many TOs and companies as I do, you can't afford to be controversial.
No, that makes sense. And yeah, that probably adds a lot to your pool of available gigs too, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said, I think Thorin has his place in esports events, and I think he adds a certain uniqueness to a broadcast that can't really be found anywhere else. And it's not just Thorin; there are other people that function in that same kind of capacity, right? But Thorin, I guess, is just the most obvious example when it comes to CS:GO. And he obviously knows where his brand lies. That he's built his career on this almost kind of controversial figure, and that has worked for him. And I applaud him, for making it work for him, because it's not something that everybody can do, and it's not something that I could do. It's because it's just not what I'm like. But yeah, so for me to be as attractive as possible, I've had to remain fairly, I guess, bland in terms of online presence personality. But other than that, not much else.
I have one more question regarding your commentary, or you in broadcasts in general, I guess, which is there anything that you do in preparation for events, and do you have any type of routine, some tradition that you go through before you get on a broadcast?
This is funny because a lot of people ask this question. Apart from prepping, to the appropriate level, knowing the teams, knowing the players, the history, and having all the relevant storyline information needed, I don't really do anything crazy for events. In terms of vocal warm-ups, there is a specific YouTube video that I use, and essentially it's an incremental speed increase of the Rap God verse from, the really fast Rap God verse from Eminem's Rap God. That's the way that I learnt that from Quickshot, and that's now what I use to vocal warm-up. And basically just go through the incremental speed increase of the Summer Lama Duma Lama, that thing. I can never remember the lyrics. I always have to read them every time I do it. But yeah, I use that as a way to vocal warm up during sort of, especially live events. I don't do as much when I'm working from home, but live events, I definitely do that much more often. But other than that, no, make sure I'm fully prepped with storyline information. I've aligned with my co-commentators on where my storylines and etc. should be going. And then it just comes down to a bit of vocal warm up.
What about during the broadcasts? Is there anything special there? I remember in the past working with Tasteless and Artosis back in the StarCraft 2 days. And one of the things that they always needed a kettle running next to their desk, essentially, to always have hot water at hand.
I always need water of some sort. I like to stand, and I like the lights turned off. So if I can have the lights turned off when I'm casting, and I can stand and I have water, I'm good.
So the lights that they put on, basically the spotlights that they put on when they put you on camera, you want those off.
Yes,
during the actual match. Okay.
Yeah, I find them distracting, and I find bright lights make me lose my train of thought. So it's easier for me if I don't have them on. So I just ask for the spotlights to go off, especially on studio broadcasts.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think I've seen a lot of times I've seen active casting desks with the lights off, and I never really thought about that.
Yeah, it's the same. A lot of people prefer it. It's not just me. It's not unique to me. It's very distracting to have bright lights. Not only does it hinder what you can see on screen, as I'm sure most people who have bright lights around their computer screens are aware. It also is, if you look into a bright light and try and keep your train of thought about something very specific, it's actually really hard to do so. So yeah, I think I was just looking into my light there to see how it would affect me, but yeah, it can be very distracting. So yeah, we mostly ask to have them turned off.
That makes sense. So for you in the future, do you have any clear idea of what your next step is? Any goals, any dreams?
I'd like to host the LEC again, but that's a bit of a pipe dream because I think Quickshot has bigger ideas and bigger brands that he wants to get in. But I'd love to do it. I think I'm probably one of the best endemic League of Legends hosts that comes from inside the game that isn't there already. Like Shox, for instance.
Yep.
I'd love to do that. I want to get my YouTube channel up with Wild Rift, which is the League of Legends mobile game coming out later this year. That's my goal for content. Currently just cruising through TFT. I want to hit Challenger in TFT. I'm Master Tier right now, so I want to hit Challenger in TFT. That'd be nice.
I just hit Silver. I'm terrible at the game.
Well, you honestly, it's very easy to climb. once you know, I don't think it takes much skill to get to Diamond at all. So
I've played less than 10 hours though, so
yeah,
I guess that's probably why.
I think once you know what you're doing and you're aware of the decisions that you need to make, I think it's quite easy to get to Diamond. I think it's a little bit more of a slog to get from Diamond to Master, and I think the Master to Challenger is quite hard. So
makes sense. Okay, I think those are good goals. I like that that there's still some competitiveness in there. You're still playing games competitively to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, it's important for content creation, especially. Like, there's no one's going to listen to me explain guides on TFT if I'm not a good rank. So that's why I did it. That's why I drove myself to get a good rank on TFT. And Master's a good rank. It's not as good as some of the players. And I just don't have enough, the hour rule. I don't have enough hours in TFT to be as good as some of the Challenger players, especially with, me having a baby who is 14 months. I can't sit and play TFT all day. Otherwise, my wife will literally tear my head off. So yeah, I think it's important, but I need to just put some more hours into it and I'll get there.
Okay. I have two more questions for you as we kind of wrap up the podcast.
Sure.
These are the fun questions that we usually ask at the end. One of them is, if you could choose between 5,000 concurrent viewers on your Twitch channel, on your personal Twitch channel, and 50,000 concurrent viewers on some brand's channel that isn't yours, which would you choose? And why?
5,000 on my channel, absolutely hands down, because that's me building my own brand, which is more important.
Okay. It's a good answer. And if you were given one tweet that's guaranteed to go viral, what would that tweet be?
Well, that's a hard one. I wouldn't want it to be something memey because it'd be a waste of an opportunity. I would love a tweet to go viral from one of my YouTube videos that drives traffic from that tweet to my YouTube channel. That'd be good. Sorry, business-minded focus, but yeah.
I mean, that's totally fair enough. That makes a lot of sense. It's very practical. I would probably go with the memes and then regret it. So
yeah, I feel like I could do a meme tweet, but then that would be all it was. It's just a meme.
There's some merit in that too.
Yeah, yeah. If you're a consistent viral memer, there's some credit to that. Yeah.
Anyway, no, that's it for my questions. I want to give you the chance here. If there's anything that you want to tell our audience, if there's anything that you feel is important when it comes to getting your feet wet or improving or getting into the industry as a whole that we didn't touch upon, I want to give you the floor.
Well, I think it's important if you're interested in esports as a whole that you are flexible, you're willing to work outside your comfort zone, you understand the barriers that are in place, and and understand that nothing is going to be handed to you on a silver platter. It takes a lot of hard work to make this a full-time career. But the number one piece of advice that I tell a lot of people that ask me, not everybody is going to make esports full-time. So don't bank on it. Have a backup plan. Have something else in your life that you're passionate about, or have something else in your life that can provide for you, because very, very, very few people make esports full-time. And a lot of people get upset and put themselves in bad life situations because they try, and it's just not possible. I would recommend having it as a hobby, and if that hobby at some point is lucky enough to materialize into a full-time opportunity, you're having a great time. Don't go into esports with the mindset that this will be your full-time career, because you're going to save yourself a lot of trouble and a lot of heartbreak by having some kind of other way to provide for yourself, which is important.
That makes sense. And where can people find you?
Twitter, Excoundrel, YouTube, Excoundrel, Twitch, Excoundrel, Instagram, Excoundrel. Basically, Excoundrel on everything. So just type Excoundrel into any social media platform and I'll turn up.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for coming on, and it was a pleasure having you. Hopefully, I'll get a chance to play some Path of Exile with you soon.
Yeah, please
that
boost
sort of
me.
thing.
That'd be great. Teach me how you make all your exalts, because I can't.
Mirrors actually.
Sure, mirrors. Teach me how you make all your mirrors.
All right.
All right. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Esports Odyssey. If you enjoyed this episode, you can follow Challenge Mode on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, where we announce all new episodes and share podcast-related news. You'll find all of our socials in the show notes. Feel free to email us at podcast@challengeabout.com if you have any questions from this or any other episodes, or if you would like to learn more about Challenge Mode and what we do.